Welcome back. You're watching Regional Roundup. Now, public governance and government institutes aim to be a forum for new ideas, a place for the exchange of solutions, as well as a source of publications and know-how for public managers at all spheres of government. Joining us now to discuss how the institution is going to help government run better is Tshidi Mokgabudi, who's the Executive Director for Public Sector and Infrastructure at KPMG. Thank you very much for coming through. Just talk to us about this Institute for Governance and how it's going to help the government and various government agencies be a little bit more accountable and efficient.
Yes, I think it's very important to recognize, first of all, that the Public Governance Institute is an independent institute supported by KPMG.
Right.
And its focus is really a forum for new ideas, a forum to share solutions which will be based on the issue analysis and come up with solutions. And it will do that in conjunction with the academia, which is then your higher institutions. We find that to be very important because the academia, the institutions, with their research database and research background, they then research all these issues and ideas. And on the professional side, which is i.e. your KPMGs, who actually meet these issues on the ground when they do the consulting or auditing. So matching the two, you really then are able to come up with best practice for your clientele, being your governments. And I think I should also highlight that this is really a global institute which is covering a number of countries. It has been established right now in Germany, in the US, in the UK, Switzerland, and now we're bringing it to the Africa continent. So the importance of it is really this knowledge sharing and best practice.
Let's talk about those best practices, because if we were just to hone in on state-owned enterprises as an element of government's work, they're very strategic in driving government's developmental program. There are lots of problems there, and one of the fundamental ones that seem to exist across the spectrum is constant misunderstandings between the executives of parastatals and the board that's meant to play the oversight role and the government as a shareholder. What are best practice standards that need to be imposed and adhered to here?
Yes, I think it's very important to understand the principles around the governance of state-owned enterprises. And those principles are, first of all, government must make sure that the state-owned enterprises operate operate within a playing field of legal and governance framework. And what I mean by the playing field, the leveling of the playing field, is that when the state-owned enterprises are both government-owned, but at the same time being commercial operations, government needs then to define its two dual roles, being the state owner, as an owner, but at the same time as the market operator. So which therefore means that there is a clear distinction that needs to be done, whereby you have an independent regulator, for instance, which will ensure that leveling of this playing field. But at the same time, on the other side, government being an owner. That's the first thing, Lerato. The second one, which I think you touched on the role of government vis-a-vis the role of the boards. It is very important that it is clearly defined that government appoints the boards. And the boards must be given the authority and the responsibility to appoint the CEOs or the executives of the entity. Once we have clarified that, you are then in a position to define that government's role is to set the clear mandates and clear objectives, not the day-to-day running of the entities.
Now, the Governance Institute also suggests that you need to measure and have a benchmark by which you measure the inputs that come from policy or financing particular objectives and the outcomes. And somewhere there's a disconnect disconnect. In your opinion, what is that disconnect in terms of getting government efficiency across the value chain, from the moment policy is decided to programs being implemented, to financing being sought, to service delivery for the electorate?
I think what you've touched on an issue of measurements. It is very important that you have the right measurements and that your measurements are both short-term measurements as well as the long-term measurements. What we tend to do at times is that we do focus on short-term measurements, which is your financial, largely your financial management, which are on an annual basis. That is fine for short-term measurements purposes, but also you need to have a long-term measurements which measure your long-term objectives.
Right.
And by so doing, you are then in a position to measure your outcomes as well with those long-term measurements. So the issue really many a times is that we do not clarify those objectives, short and medium and long, and thereby we are not able to clarify your short-term measurements as well as your long-term measurements. It's about that clarification.
All right, talking about financial issues, we do have parastatals that work really well, Transnet, for instance, being a case in point. But what you've seen there is the mandate comes from the government in terms of these are our strategic objectives as a developmental state. We need to see transport logistics working well, pipelines being built, all of the above. But you go to the capital markets and you source that financing. And oftentimes in Africa, that's where things become really tricky, because the credit worthiness of a state-owned entity often has something to do with a reflection of the credit worthiness of the state, which is a guarantor. How do we overcome that problem?
Yes, I think that guarantor part of the state is very important, because you must realize also that the state has a responsibility for the public. You know, and the state, the SOE monies largely come from the state, from your state, your public budgets, which act as a guarantee for them to go to the markets. You know, so that's very important to realize first of all. So therefore, you can't really divorce that role of a state as a guarantor from the way the state-owned enterprises must go to market and receive that funding. That is very important to make sure that those two things are together. I think the issue, the critical issue here, really, it's not about those type of roles. It is about management as well. Because for you to get to those ratings, whether as a country or as a state-owned enterprises, is about your clarification of your planning, your clarification of your objectives, and how you manage the business. And that is what really I have found to be the major issues, rather than the funding models that they